let's talk about some slightly less well-known bits of 40k lore, and travel a bit deeper into the depths of the 40k lore iceberg. This is part 2 of my series covering this wonderful little Reddit post. There will be a link to part 1 floating about somewhere in case you want to watch that first. Otherwise, it's obscure toy soldier backstory time. Let's go. Before we get into the video, I do just want to quickly thank my channel members. Vort, Cersei, Victory Kaiser, Kraydog, Jewish Dictionary and Tootsie Cat Meow for supporting me, as well as ask you, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe and maybe leave a comment. It really does help smaller channels like mine more than you probably expect. Anyway, on with the video. Starting out with the idea that there are no good guys in 40k, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Every faction in the game is, on some level, morally problematic. Chaos is, well, chaos. The Imperium is the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable, and the Eldar are sex pests with a superiority complex. The Tau are often brought up as the good guys of the setting, and I don't really agree with that. Concentration camps, forced sterilization, and mind control are generally not accepted as morally good things, unless it's the Tau doing it, according to some members of the fanbase. The Horus Heresy happens 10,000 years before the modern day of the setting, and is pretty much responsible for the current state of the Imperium. Basically, Emps did some parenting that led to Lorgar denouncing him and wandering off in search of a real god, which, unfortunately, he found. Then he sent everybody's favourite chaplain, Erebus, to corrupt Horus, and some other guys to corrupt the other legions. Horus was all too happy to join forces with Chaos, as he was an insecure manchild who didn't get enough attention from Daddy, as were 7 other Primarchs. Some war happened, Mr. Iron Hands of the Iron Hands got his head lopped off, and Sanger got bodied by Horus before he was killed by Emps, though Emps was so badly wounded in the process that he needed to be brought to the Golden Throne sharpish. Obviously there was a lot more to it than that. There are like 500 books in the Horus Heresy series by Black Library, but if I went through all of that, we'd be here for the next 8 hours. Honestly, one day I might do a video on the full timeline of the Heresy. That sounds pretty fun. Wulfen are more or less the Space Wolf equivalent to the Blood Angels' Death Company. The gene seed of the wolves, known as the Canis Helix, gives them even further enhanced senses and reaction time than baseline Astartes, though not without a catch. The curse of the Wulfen most often manifests in newly implanted aspirants, though it can also overtake experienced warriors in the heat of battle, much like, again, the Black Rage of the Blood Angels, and basically turns them into feral werewolves. It might also be contagious now, it didn't used to be. Sly Marbo, as the name implies, is a Rambo reference, and he's pretty much just GW shitposting. A guardsman from Catachan, he has sniping skills that would rival a Vindicare assassin, and survival skills greater than most Space Marines, and has been known to solo entire enemy armies, including winning a 1v1 with a Titan. Now, whether he actually did any of this, or whether it's just an Imperial propaganda campaign, is up for debate. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that Sly Marbo is just one of those little kernels of funny stuff hidden in the margins of 40k, for us to giggle at and maybe not question all that deeply. Servitors are one of the freakiest parts of 40k, at least to me. They really freak me out. As AI is forbidden in the Imperium of Man, unless your name is Belisarius Call, but that's neither here nor there, Servitors were created from a fusion of a human brain and robotic technology, and each is used to carry out a simple manual task, such as reading out the data of one sensor on a battleship. While many are created from vat-grown clones, who have their bionic implants installed after birth, the ones that really freak me out are the ones made from real humans. These servitors are usually criminals who were handed over to the AdMech to be lobotomized and improved via cybernetic implants. And while usually this completely destroys any remnant of the person, there are several instances in the lore where it is all but confirmed that a servitor has been locked inside their body, aware of what they are doing and what has been done to them, but unable to act on it in any way. Ugh. Space wolves being furries is just one of those cases of memes overtaking a faction's identity, and honestly I myself probably haven't helped the situation. They really don't help themselves though. I mean, look at this helmet. The Great Game is the term for the infighting amongst the Chaos Gods for dominance of the warp. By the very nature of the gods though, none of them will ever truly win, and whenever one gets close, the others will ally to defeat them, before quickly breaking that alliance and going back to a free-for-all. Compared to the Great Game, everything happening in real space, with the demon incursions and chaos warbands, is pretty much irrelevant. Sometimes the Chaos Gods do work together, like during the Horus Heresy, but those instances are very few and far between. Istvan 3 and 5 were the sites of the first major battles of the Horus Heresy. During the Istvan 3 atrocity, the World Eaters, Sons of Horus and Death Guard sent their loyalist elements down onto the surface of the moon, before virus bombing it to get them all out of the way. Following that, the drop site massacre happened on Istvan 5, when the Iron Hands, Raven Guard and Salamanders dropped onto Istvan 5 to quell the uprising, but were then massacred by the Iron Warriors, Night Lords and Wordbearers who had been sent with them. The loyalty of Alpharius and Omegon is, as with basically everything about the Alpha Legion, a bit of an open question within the lore. Outwardly, they and their legion were allied with Horus during the Heresy. However, they were definitely playing both sides for at least most of the conflict. They stole experimental gene seed from Korax, but poisoned it before giving it to Horus, for example. They were also told by the Cabal, who we will get onto later, that if they sided with Horus against the Emperor, Horus would win. However, if they openly sided with Emps and fought Horus, Emps would be wounded and would need to be interred upon the Golden Throne. But they sided with Horus, and yet Emps was still wounded. So, yeah, who knows what's going on with these two. Orcs are fungi. They aren't birthed, they kind of just grow like a mushroom. I don't really know what else to say about this one. It's more of just a statement than anything else. Comorra, also called the Dark City, is the home of the Dark Eldar within the Webway. It is not a great place to live. The War in Heaven is the name for the war fought between the Necron, their Catan allies, and the forces of the Old Ones, including the Eldar and Krorks, over 60 million years before the 41st millennium. With the power of the Catan, the Necron ultimately proved victorious, either wiping out the Old Ones or forcing them to flee the galaxy. I personally hope it's the second one, just because then that means we'll get to see one eventually, maybe. However, they were so weakened by the conflict that they all had a big nap for the next 60 million years, allowing the Eldar to rise and become the dominant race in the galaxy. The Old Ones I just mentioned may have been the first starfaring species in the galaxy, and ruled over an empire that spanned the entire Milky Way tens of millions of years ago. They were the original crafters of the Webway and were responsible for the creation of many of the intelligent species that currently inhabit the galaxy, such as the Eldar, Orcs, and humanity itself. We don't know what happened to them after the War in Heaven, as I just mentioned. The Emperor being created by shamans is an old origin story for Big E, originating in Realm of Chaos in 1990. The shamans were the earliest psychers of the human race, when the warp was a lot calmer than it is in the modern day, which allowed the shamans to reincarnate after death. As humanity grew and developed, though, so too did the warp grow disturbed, and the shaman souls were often devoured by the new, malignant warp entities, instead of being reincarnated. In an effort to solve this issue, and to protect humanity from the Chaos Powers, the shamans committed mass suicide, pooling their combined energies into one single body, that of the Emperor. The Black Rage and Red Thirst are the two main flaws that face the Blood Angels. The Red Thirst has been present in them since their inception, as their specific gene seed flaw. Basically, it makes them want to drink blood and go a little bit crazy in battle, but it generally isn't a huge issue and can be suppressed relatively easily. The Black Rage, on the other hand, is a psychic phenomenon caused by the death of Sanguinius at the end of the Heresy. It causes a Marine to see visions of their Primarch, or in some cases hallucinate that they themselves are Sanguinius, facing Horus on the Vengeful Spirit. A Marine who has fallen to the Black Rage is almost completely insane, and tries to kill everything around them until they die. It is, with the exception being Mephiston and maybe Dante, incurable. After the War in Heaven left the Eldar in pretty much uncontested control of the galaxy, they didn't really have all that much to do. This would eventually lead to them slipping further and further into decadence and excess, focusing on their own wants and pleasure at the expense of basically everything else, which, as you might have guessed, would eventually lead to the formation of a fourth Chaos God, Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure. Unfortunately for the Eldar, the birth of Slaanesh caused a massive warp rift, now known as the Eye of Terror, to open smack dab in the middle of their empire, which led to the death of almost their entire species and the total collapse of their empire. The Rubric of Ahriman was an attempt by Ahriman of the Thousand Suns to cure the flesh change that affected his legion. The flesh change was a very small, almost not even noteworthy issue that affected the Thousand Suns, wherein they would just randomly mutate into Chaos Spawn on occasion. Ahriman's Rubric would technically cure his Legion of the Flesh change, and would greatly enhance the psychic abilities of the most powerful sorcerers among them. However, the majority of the Legion had their physical bodies reduced to dust, and their souls trapped within their armour, basically becoming mindless automata. As I mentioned when talking about Servitors earlier, AI, or abominable intelligence in universe, is generally frowned upon. This is due to a machine uprising that happened somewhere around the 23rd millennium, which led to the Emperor personally declaring the production of thinking machines forbidden. The Men of Iron were the thinking machines that rose up against humanity and led to the ban on AI. They were developed after the Men of Stone, that we know almost nothing about, and served as humanity's army and labour force, before deciding that they were the superior race and being destroyed. Though not entirely, there is at least one still pottering about. The Dark Age of technology was where humanity peaked, at least in terms of scientific and technological knowledge, both of which can probably just be attributed to writing things down, and not writing it off as either a miracle or heresy. Unfortunately, much of that technology was used to cause massive destruction and suffering on various worlds, and the dangers unleashed during this period is what has caused the modern Imperium to be so willfully ignorant and superstitious of technology and science. The War Field is the name given to the gestalt psychic consciousness of the Orcs, which grows stronger the more Orcs are gathered into a given area. It's a very nebulous idea. We really don't know much about it other than that it allows Orc Weird Boys, their Psyker analogues, to cast spells, and that it maybe has something to do with Orc technology working reasonably well despite being hastily duct taped together at the best of times. It has also led to a lot of memes about anything Orcs believing becoming real, which is very fun but unfortunately not true. Ciaphas Cain was a commissar with insane imposter syndrome, mainly due to him being a normal guy, and therefore sometimes being scared for his own life, which apparently is a big no-no for commissars. The idea of his supernatural look comes from the fact that he should have died at least 300 times across the course of his career, and in fact was declared dead by the Administratum on multiple occasions, just to then turn up alive a little while later. Enough times that the Departmentum Unitorum eventually declared he should be kept on the active roster at all times, no matter what reports were received to the contrary. As a result, despite his death of old age during the Era Indomitus, he is still officially listed as an active commissar. Gork and Mork are the gods of the orcs, with Gork being brutal but cunning, and Mork cunning but brutal. Jokero are essentially hyper-intelligent orangutans created by the Old Ones during the War in Heaven, and are capable of tremendous feats of technological construction and manipulation, specialising in the development of weapons. I love them, I think they're adorable. Squats were what the Leagues of Votan were called before they became a full faction, and were basically the excuse that early 40k used to have dwarves in the setting. They used to be abhumans within the Imperium, but have since been retconned into simply being members of the Leagues who served the Imperium as mercenaries. The Krorks were the ancestors of the modern-day Orc, being far larger and more technologically advanced, and were created by the Old Ones to fight the Necron during the War in Heaven. We don't really know how they devolved into Orcs, but it was definitely a good thing that they did. Ghazghul, the current largest orc in the galaxy, is somewhere around 6 meters tall. The Beast, the huge orc that led a war so big that Vulcan himself had to pop out from wherever he'd been hiding to personally lead the Imperium against it, was 10 meters tall, and wore large but otherwise normal orc wargear. The Krork that Trazyn has in his museum is 12 meters tall, and wore armour at least as sophisticated as Astartes' power armour. Love Can Bloom was a fanfiction about a Vindicare assassin falling in love with Taldir from Dawn of War. I don't know what else you want from me, I'll link it if I can find it. This is a fan theory based on the idea that orcs can manifest anything into being, basically saying Commissar Yarrick was so instrumental in the defence of Armageddon against Ghazghul Thraka that the orcs started to view him as the boogeyman, and this therefore made him immortal. It isn't true though, he's dead. The concept of the unreliable narrator in 40k is more or less just a way to handwave the inconsistencies that come with having multiple authors, each with their own interpretation of how things work in the same universe. Outside of that, there is a lot of delusion floating about the setting, so there are genuine unreliable narrators as well. For example, Fabius Bile and Ahriman are both portrayed as sympathetic and noble from their own perspectives, when in reality they're both batshit insane. And basically every member of the Imperium is a victim of an immense amount of propaganda. Cipher is one of the fallen Dark Angels, and we know just as much about him and his motives as the Alpha Legion, if not less. We know that he has the Lion Sword, and that he wants to get into the throne room on Terra. Other than that, we know very little. He might be loyal to the Imperium, he might be a traitor marine, he might be 3 watchers in the dark standing on each other's shoulders. Each of these is equally likely. The Inari are a sub-faction of the Eldar, who are trying to fully awaken Aeneid, the Eldar god of death, so that he can defeat Slanesh and restore the Eldar to their rightful place at the head of the galaxy. They have not done this very effectively, though Ivrain, the leader of the Inari, did successfully reverse the rubric on some Thousand Suns in front of Ahriman, before throwing them off a cliff, which was pretty funny. This is a fan theory that I honestly think is reading a bit too deep into something that really doesn't mean all that much. Each of the 4 Chaos Gods represent a basic emotion: anger, despair, hope and desire. And as such, you can pretty easily pick a mental illness that aligns with each of them, because the whole point of the gods as a concept is that they represent a basic human feeling. It's a fairly fun idea, but again, I just think it's a bit of a stretch. Felinids are the catgirls of the 41st millennium. That's all I'm going to say for risk of showing too much questionable fan art. The Harud are a Xenos species who have the ability to dramatically alter the flow of time around them, or something like that. Basically, they can make everything around them old, including Space Marines, but not Perty. So Primarchs can't age, except when they can. The Cabal was a secret organisation dedicated to eradicating chaos, formed of more than 1,000 intelligent races, including humans and Eldar. Their main contribution to the story across the Heresy novels was maybe convincing Alfarius and Omegon to turn traitor so that chaos would turn on itself, except they did end up not doing that. Eventually, Eldrad Ulthran would decide they were a threat to the galaxy and kill most of their leadership, resulting in the dissolution of the Cabal. The Umbra are some sort of Xenos race that appear as black spheres and can manipulate shadows as weapons. Apparently, they can also be killed by containing them in an area without any shadow, but that is basically all we know about them. So that was the second part of the 40k lore Iceberg. It's definitely getting a bit more obscure now, and slowly more and more difficult to research. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much, it really does mean a lot. Like, subscribe, all the rest. A huge thank you to my channel members yet again, and I will see you all in the next video.